A matchup looking for revenge. We're breaking down the North Carolina Tar Heels, the week one opponent of the Golden Gophers today.
You are Locked On Golden Gophers, your daily podcast on the Minnesota Golden Gophers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Gopher fans? You're listening to Locked On Golden Gophers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name's Kane Rob, host of the podcast, former collegiate football video coordinator and recruiting assistant, here to talk Golden Gophers with you each and every day of the week, Monday through Friday. And I mean that in full certainty now. We're back with the full grind. The season's going to be here before we know it, and we are taking every single day, Monday through Friday, talking Gophers, especially when it comes to football with the season getting ready to kick off. And we're kicking it off with our Behind the Enemy Line segments. We're breaking down every single Gophers opponent in detail, the players you need to know, the changes that have made, and so much more. So be sure to hit subscribe so you don't miss any of your daily Gophers content moving forward. After we finish up the opponent roundups in the next 12 shows, then we're going to move over to the Gophers themselves, breaking down the position groups, the potential depth charts, and how their group ranks across the Big Ten. You're not going to want to miss this. It's all my opinions, but I'm trying to put all the stats, all the logic, and less bias behind it all. So definitely, if you want to get caught up before the Gophers season kicks off with both our opponents and the Gopher squad, be sure to hit subscribe over on YouTube. So today we're going to kick it off with the latest Gophers commits for future commit classes. The Gophers have been working way ahead of time, more ahead of schedule than they ever have in Coach PJ Fleck's time. So we got a couple more to talk about, and then we're also going to break down the North Carolina Tar Heels, the changes, the transfers, players to be on the lookout for, and their strengths and weaknesses heading into the week one matchup. Now, like I said, the next 12 shows, we're covering the Gophers football opponents in 2024 behind enemy lines. As always, though, before we dive into the deep dive, I want to cover any breaking news. So this week, today, we're talking about 3 new future commits for the Minnesota Golden Gophers, 1 in 2025 and 2 in 2026. So the first one is punter Luke Ryers from Minnesota, goes to East Ridge High School. He was committed to Alabama. That's right, Alabama, as a dual sport athlete, both football and baseball. He is a punter, like I had mentioned, but now he will be playing both of those sports for the Minnesota Golden Gophers in Dinkytown. Now, there's not a ton of stats that I can look into or find production-wise at high school level punting, but that being said, to pull anyone away from Bama, I don't care what position, kicker, punter, offensive lineman, you name it. If you're pulling them away from Bama, that is a win in itself. So we're keeping them home. Borders are still staying secure. No matter what the position, you love to see that. Now, moving to the 2026 commits, there's 2 of them. That makes 4 commits to the 2026 class, which has to be the earliest that PJ Fleck has been getting multiple recruits for a class, not the next year, but the year prior. That hasn't happened in quite some time. So 4 guys in that 2026 class, 2 committing over the last week or so. The first being edge rusher Kennedy Uzama from Maryland. He earned a scholarship from camp and immediately committed to the Gophers. So that's always nice to see that action and the quick wanting to lock in, but it also gives you a little bit of timidness because you don't know if it's only because maybe it's the first Power 5 or Power Conference offer. Maybe it's because they're excited and in the moment. So I always have a little bit of hesitancy, especially when it's someone from like far out of state, hasn't really had the relationship. So hopefully he stays locked in. Love that it's an edge rusher with Coach Winston Tibetier, because he is a relationship builder, constantly having great relationships with all the commits and the prospects that he has been dealing with over the years for Minnesota. And you see that edge rusher room getting stronger and stronger and getting a ton of upside and getting a ton of potential in the room of every single class. So I'm really excited about it. Maybe that is a positive alone that maybe hopefully will keep Kennedy Uzama here. Now, he is 6'5" and he is long. He is lanky. He has reach to him. So that can help not only in the run game, but also in that pass rushing phase. Now, he also plays both offense and defense for his high school team. But like I said, for the Gophers and where they're looking at him, they're looking more at him as an edge rusher. Now, he is aiming for a lofty goal of 20 plus sacks in his junior year this upcoming season. So we'll keep our eyes peeled if he can make those goals happen. But I definitely like the potential upside with Kennedy Uzama. Now, the other player committed to the 2026 class for Minnesota is Owen Lansue, a quarterback from Illinois. Now, he is 6'2", 165 pounds, and in his sophomore year, his first year as a starter in the high school level of football, he threw for 2,106 pass yards, 26 touchdowns, and I believe he had 7 interceptions. So he took pretty good care of the ball, decent production, especially for a sophomore. And like I said, that was his first year as a starter. Now, other power conference offers include Cincinnati and Northwestern. So he's got multiple power conference offers as a 2026 quarterback who has only played 1 year of high school varsity football as a starter. So you like to see that, but also Cincinnati, Northwestern, not necessarily known for being a staple for their QB development or their eye for quarterback talent, either way. So it's still a lot up in the air as far as what is the upside of Owen Lansue. Now, we have seen that there's been discussions with him with Iowa State, Michigan, and Notre Dame. Those are some schools where you're like, okay, they've done some quarterback numbers. They've done, Brock Purdy came from Iowa State, right? So that's looking good. Rocco Becht is at Iowa State right now. He's looking pretty good. They've got an eye for quarterback talent. So you definitely like to see those conversations started, but he didn't have an official offer from any of them. Now, this is super early again, especially for a quarterback to commit. So this could be a long ride, but hopefully a positive sign for the Gophers. He's not a rushing quarterback. I believe he had like single digit rush yards last year. It might have been double digit, but it wasn't anything high by any means. So he's definitely more of a pocket passer. Now, his completion percentage last year was only 58%, which is lower than you'd like to see. You'd like to see above that 60% number. But again, first year as a starter at the varsity level as a sophomore. So those numbers are bound to improve. He has 2 more years to really continue to grow and improve. And the more he does that, the more positive it is for the Gophers, but also the more competition that could enter the conversation. So those are the latest commits when it comes to your Golden Gophers. But I want to get into the meat and the bones, which is breaking down our opponents on the season. And the first one that we are covering today is the North Carolina Tar Heels. The Gophers played them last year in a away game, and the box score wasn't pretty, the end score wasn't pretty, but it was a lot closer game than what those look like. We're going to break down what changes have happened for the North Carolina Tar Heels coming up next. First, I want to talk to you about a new friend of the show, and that is none other than the one and the only, the Ibotta app. If you haven't checked out the Ibotta app, now is the time, because it's summertime, which means you probably are getting into barbecue season. We're midway, probably even halfway past the summer, but Labor Day is coming up. At Labor Day, a lot of folks like to barbecue, myself included. So you can stock up on all of your grilling favorites and earn cash back on every purchase when you use Ibotta. So you won't have to choose between burgers or hot dogs. You can get both. Make sure to get the brats while you're at it. But Ibotta is a free app that lets you earn cash back every time you shop. Earn hundreds of items from groceries to beauty supplies and even toys. That's all the things you can earn on and so much more. So you can make sure you're beating inflation no matter what you are purchasing. Now, the average Ibotta user earns $256 per year, and that could cover that entire grocery trip you're looking at or that fancy dinner you've been craving. So definitely download it. Ibotta is offering our listeners $5 just for trying Ibotta. So use the code LOCKEDONCollege when you register. So go to the App Store or the Google Play Store, download the free Ibotta app to start earning cash back, and use promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $5 straight to your account. That's IBOTTA in the Google Play or App Store, and use promo code LOCKEDONCollege. But that's not where the fun ends, folks, because we also need to talk about our friends over at Factor, because warmer, sunnier days are calling and you can fuel up with Factor. And that means no prep, no mess meals. It's just easy and delicious food. Now you can meet your wellness goals in time for that final summer beach day, and you can get it going. Factor's fresh, never frozen meals are dietitian approved and are ready in just under 2 minutes. So no matter how busy you are, you always have time to enjoy nutritious, great tasting meals. And they have 35 different meals and more than 60 add-ons to choose from every week. So you'll always have new flavors to explore. You don't have to worry about eating the same old. And they have everything from breakfast to dessert, and you can stay fueled easy with nutritious options. So keep kitchen time to a minimum. Factor meals are ready in 2 minutes. No shopping, prepping, cooking, or cleaning up. That sounds like the perfect meal to me. And head to factormeals.com/lockedoncollege50. Again, that's factormeals.com/lockedoncollege50 and use code lockedoncollege50 to get 50% off your first box plus 20% off your next month. So that's not one deal, but two deals with 50% off the first box and 20% off your next month. Code LockedOnCollege50 at factormeals.com/LockedOnCollege50. Definitely do that and get 20% off and 50% off. It's a deal. It's a steal. It's a saver with an active subscription. So definitely head on over that way today. All right, Gophers fans, we are diving into the North Carolina breakdown. Now we're kicking it off. You've got Mack Brown. He's in his second stint of head coaching at North Carolina. They've found some success over his years here. They have had some close calls to almost winning the ACC conference, but they haven't been able to get over that hump. There's been a lot of hype. They've had multiple quarterbacks get drafted, but they haven't been able to win the conference. But that being said, they're still a quality team. Mack Brown has gotten things taken a bit more seriously with the North Carolina Tar Heels. So you like to see them on the rise. That Jordan Brand school, the colors look great. I'm not going to lie to you on any of that. But when you're looking at the rest of the staff, you've got Chip Lindsey as the offensive coordinator. It is his second year. So last year was his first year as the OC. Before Phil Longo had departed, he was there. Now he's with Wisconsin, so we're familiar with him. But Chip Lindsey, we got to see him in his first year as the offense coordinator last year, and he found a way to torch the Gophers defense and then some. Now, like I said, in his first year with UNC last season, his offense averaged 491.2 yards per game total. So they were 20th in the country and second in the ACC when it came to total yards per game. Now, his offense was also first in passing in the ACC and third in rushing. So they did it both on the ground and through the air, and they were 19th in passing in the country and 14th in rushing in the country. So overall, they have had a very high-flying, very hard-to-stop offense, especially in that first year with Chip Lindsey. But the biggest question will be, can he follow that up with the departure of first-round pick Drake May, who is leading that offense? Now you have a couple different quarterbacks. We'll talk about them coming up pretty shortly here, but who is going to step up and how big will that drop-off be? That's the biggest question on the offensive side of things, along with the offensive line. Now, flipping into the defense, they have a new defensive coordinator. Before they had Chizik. Chizik is out, and Jeff Collins, the former Georgia Tech head coach, is in. Now, like I said, he was a head coach at Georgia Tech from 2019 to 2022. And prior to his head coaching opportunities at Temple and then Georgia Tech, he was actually a defensive coordinator for Mississippi State and Florida. And he's had some big NFL names head on to the NFL after with those two programs. But at Mississippi State, he found some decent success. He had a top 5 defense in the SEC in 2013 and the number 1 red zone defense in 2014. But then you move on to his Florida success, and that's where things really took off. Collins oversaw a defense that was ranked number 6 in scoring defense in 2016 and number 11 in scoring defense in 2015. He was also the 7th team in the history of college football in the last 20 years. Sorry, let me slow my roll, back the momentum up a little bit. He was the 7th team in the last 20 years to not allow a touchdown against 3 FBS Power 5 schools on the road in the same season. So this was a solid move, in my opinion, for a squad looking to continue to build upwards on the defensive side of the ball. I think he could be a really great addition for the North Carolina Tar Heels. But let's talk about the players. Let's talk about the guys who get it done on the field. Now, impact transfers for your North Carolina Tar Heels include Max Johnson, quarterback from Texas A&M. He could be the potential starter. You got Jacoby Criswell coming back to North Carolina. He had initially battled with Drake May, ended up losing the battle, obviously, ended up sitting or being the backup for a year, then transferring to Arkansas in Drake May's second year as the starter. He didn't get to start at Arkansas either, so really rough going for Jacoby Criswell, but he comes back to North Carolina, probably going to be a very high quality backup again for North Carolina, but probably won't be the starter. Then you got offensive tackle and Howard Sampson coming from North Texas. He could potentially find his way into a starting position. Austin Blasky from Georgia, I believe he's a center. He could potentially be a starter. Joshua Harris from Ole Miss, a potential starter on the D-line. Jakeen Harris from North Carolina State, in-state rival, just crazy to see, but he flips over to North Carolina and he could potentially start at a safety position as well. Now, Ja'Kai Leftwich, they brought in another big dog from Georgia Tech, so Jeff Collins, but other side of the ball. And then Darwin Barlow, a running back from USC, and Jake Johnson, the brother of Max Johnson, also coming from Texas A&M. He was a tight end. So when you're looking at those impact transfers, a lot of those I said could potentially put their name in the conversation for a starter with this group. And that is because not only do they have their star quarterback departing, Drake May, third pick in the NFL draft, going to the New England Patriots, but you've got either Max Johnson, who transfers in from Texas A&M, Jacoby Criswell, who transfers back from Arkansas, or Connor Harrell, who has been committed with the team for the last 2 years, I believe. He got to play in the bowl game last year, had some decent production there. So you've got 3 different quarterbacks that could try to compete for this job. Now, if you're looking at the tea leaves, I think Max Johnson ends up probably pulling that one off. I believe he had some decent offers in the transfer portal. And so for him to go and pick North Carolina pretty early on in the process too, it tells me that they've invested a little bit of money in that one. And so he probably has the leading head start in that starting quarterback race if it isn't locked up already. Now, on the running back side, you've got Omarion Hampton. Plain and simple, that's a starter. No need to go beyond that when it comes to high-quality running backs, because my man was a Doak Walker finalist, top 3 finalist, meaning he was up for best running back in the country last season. He can get it done in the air as a pass catcher. He's a bruising back on the ground, but Omarion Hampton is the real deal, and he is going to be the staple of their offense next year, regardless of their passing game. He is going to find a lot of touches and a lot of opportunities on the field. Now, like I said, they brought in Darwin Barlow from USC. He didn't get a lot of time out there, but it adds depth to the room. And then you've got Caleb Hood, who's been in the room for, I believe, at least one other year. So you've got some familiarity in that room. But like I said, Omarion Hampton leads the charge. Now, in the wide receiver room, that was my concern for this team last year. They found a lot of production across the room. J.J. Jones, he was their leading receiver in receiving yards last year. That was more so because Tez Walker didn't get to play all of the games. He was ineligible for the first few games, including against the Gophers. He wasn't allowed to play, but Tez Walker only ended up like 15 yards or so behind J.J. Jones. So the real number 1 was Tez Walker, J.J. Jones being the number 2 for the North Carolina Tar Heels last year. But J.J. Jones is back. Nate McCullum is back, and he was the 3rd receiver on the team for wide receivers with receiving yard production. But Minnesota knows him all too well. Nate McCullum absolutely destroyed the Gophers in that game last year. 15 receptions, 165 yards, and a touchdown. So you can't underestimate their wide receiver room, regardless of if it doesn't look like they have that shining star receiver like it's Tez Walker. But Minnesota can't overlook them, plain and simple. Now, they also bring back an extremely productive tight end in Bryson Nesbitt. Highly productive last year, 585 yards, also had 5 touchdowns. He's a weapon in his own right. I believe they also have Copenhaver, who is a pretty good tight end. And then they've got Jake Johnson, who transfers in, who has a connection with his brother as well. He could be a nice tight end. So they've got a few tight ends in that room that can get it done. I don't know how great they are as blocking tight ends. Nesbitt's a big dude, so I'm going to assume he can get it done. But overall, pretty decent tight ends, stable wide receivers, quite the opposite from last year heading into the season, at least from what it looked like, but they held their own. So I'm not going to doubt them too much on this front. Omarion Hampton's the truth. Big questions at quarterback, but then you move to the offensive line. This is my biggest question for the North Carolina Tar Heels in this upcoming season. And that's a big question to have with your offensive line only having one starter back in Willie Lampkin, but they brought in some experience, or they brought in some transfers. They're not necessarily experienced, but they have the intangibles, they have the size, they have the potential strength to be quality guys, but they haven't really played much. So the biggest question is, can they step up into those bigger roles, and can they do it quickly, especially by game one? That's all Minnesota cares about. We don't care about that beyond, because they're not in the same conference as us. But they also have a young up-and-comer in Trevion Green, who got some snaps last year, and he did pretty well, good PFF grade overall. But the offense has a lot of production back aside from the quarterback and the offensive line. But they've lost a lot of star power in Drake May and Tez Walker. So we'll see what that upside of the offense looks like through the air and in the protection area of the offense. But you flip it to defense, 94th last year in total defense, 94th in pass defense, 90th in rush defense, 72nd in scoring defense, and 26th in the nation in turnovers gained. Now, all of these except for the rush defense were improvements from the year prior. Rush defense, pretty consistent overall, 86th the year prior, 90th last year. Now, the offense, total defense, and the pass defense were 116th the year prior and both 94th last year. So a slight improvement, but not drastic. And then scoring defense, they went from 102nd the year prior to 72nd last year. But the biggest flip was the turnovers gained, where they went from 105th the year prior to 26th in the nation last year. So they took positive strides in most categories, but they were more slight positive strides. But they took a leap in the turnovers gained part. So we'll see what the new defensive coordinator brings to this defense. Can they make drastic improvements? If so, this North Carolina team could make some noise in the ACC. But if they're still staying kind of a below average defense, which they ended up being last year, then they're going to have some question marks around them. But like I said, the team overall, not bad, not amazing, but not bad on the defensive end. Now, the team has some impact defenders returning, including their best graded players like Kymon Rucker, who is the jack, which is a hybrid between the offensive or outside linebacker and an edge rusher. They also have their middle linebacker back in Power Eccles, and then they have cornerback Elijah Huzzy and safety Antavius Lane. All of those players played over 400 snaps last year, and all of them graded above average on PFF. So they've got a decent core of starters back on the defense. And lastly, we're going to look at the 2024 class of commits for North Carolina and who could potentially be some names that maybe could make early impacts. There are two guys that jumped out to me. 4-star player, Jordan Shipp, a wide receiver who could maybe make an immediate impact, especially if he has a strong camp. Because like I said, it doesn't seem like they have the star power in that wide receiver room, at least from what we've seen from the returners. So if Jordan Shipp can step in and be a stud, that Tez Walker type, then maybe he can hit the field early and be a weapon for them. Now, Jaden Patterson is a young DB in the class who could also have some big time upside. So we'll see. Those are the two that stood out to me the most, both of them being 4-star guys. But UNC has a talented team, but there are still major questions, especially at the quarterback and the offensive line. So if they got the right additions that step in seamlessly, this team could be really, really tough. If not, I think that this could be a game that definitely leans in the Gophers' favor. We're going to talk about what's make or break for this game in 2024. What are the strengths and the weaknesses of North Carolina, and where I could see this game going to close out today's show coming up next. First, I want to talk to you about our friends over at FanDuel because, yes, the summer is coming to a close, but there are still opportunities for you to get in on the action, especially as football is approaching. So you can get in there and dream up bets anytime that you are in the mood. And right now, even though the summer's coming to a close, it's still going on with their all customers deal with a bonus or a boost on the daily. So there's something for everyone every day all summer long. So you can go to FanDuel.com and start making the most of your summer. You can take a look at that North Carolina versus Minnesota matchup. It's in favor of Minnesota by 2.5 points. So you could take the line if you're a North Carolina fan listening and you're like, look, this Gopher dude, he doesn't know what he's fully talking about. We're going to smack the Gophers again. Then you can go take your chance at the upset. And if you're like a Gophers fan and you're like, look, I think the Gophers got this one in the bag. 2.5 points. Yep, let's make it happen. But you can take an advantage of it at FanDuel.com. Now, me personally, I'm looking at the over-under line on the total points scored, 50.5. I'm taking the under because the first week games are almost always low-scoring games. They're almost always kind of ugly to watch. People are still working out the kinks, so under 50.5 feels safe to me. But you can dream up your bets over at FanDuel.com. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Locked On. All right, Gophers fans, we are wrapping this up talking about the strengths and the weaknesses of the UNC Tar Heels. Overall, when I'm looking at this North Carolina team, I think the strengths are they have one of the best running backs in the entire country. That's going to be tough, especially with the Gophers, who had a struggle stopping the run, especially as the season went on last year. Now, that being said, they also have strong defensive starters back. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that those defensive starters were all-stars last year because, like I said, their overall defense still finished below average in the country, but they have a lot of returning production. So if Jeff Collins comes in and he's got the system and he's got the way to make it happen, that could spell some trouble for the Gophers early on because they have a lot of returning production, which means chemistry, which means understanding, which means that they can play faster potentially in this new system. So we'll see how that translates. But the transfers also have a lot of upside. I think that's a strength, but many are lacking true playing time. So we'll see how it all gels together. And then finally, they have a new defensive coordinator who brings back rock solid production, or who brings rock solid production as a defensive coordinator. So with a lot of those veterans back, defensive coordinator who has proven it in the big conferences, the power conference levels, that definitely gives you some potential upside, especially because in game one, you can have your opponent guessing because they don't know exactly what you're going to throw at them. Now, the Gophers could go and look at Georgia Tech film. They could go all the way back and look at some Florida and Mississippi State film from way back, but it's going to be tough to look at a realistic wrinkles of what this defense can bring. So that's definitely a strength for North Carolina in matchup one. Now, the weaknesses for me are how big will the drop off be from Drake May to whoever ends up the official replacement. My guess is Max Johnson, but could be Connor Harrell, it could be Jacoby Criswell. But I don't think any of those players are nearly as productive or as talented, I should say, as Drake May. So how big will that drop off be? Because like I said, they went from 19th in the entire country last year in passing offense or passing yards per game. Can they stay in the top 20? Can they be that heavy of a passing favorite? Or will it take a dip into the 50s, into the 60s? And that's quite a drop when it comes to passing production. Now, I'm not afraid. I think their rushing production stays high because Omarion Hampton is the truth. But that's a big question overall, is that quarterback in the passing production. The other weakness for me is, will the new O-line get to the level of chemistry and less mistakes and what have you fast enough? Because like I said, this offensive line, it only has one returning starter, and you can't really scheme up or get live reps in fall camp when it comes to your O-line, because you're not going 100% speed on speed, ready to kill the quarterback. Your defense is not training like that. They're not in there getting ready to actually obliterate your quarterback. So there's not 100%. Maybe you go 90% in some live reps, but usually you're probably going 80 to 85%, and you're doing wrap tackling sometimes and things like that. So you don't get a full emphasis. You don't get a full experience as a full offensive line unit on what a defense's speed will be in the live game action until you start getting those live reps and start getting going in the official games, which could play to an advantage for this Gophers team, especially having a new defensive coordinator with new wrinkles and new blitzes to put pressure on this offensive line that will be newer across 4 of the 5 positions. So when you're looking at this matchup, I think make or break in 2024, this team is weaker than last year's iteration. That plus being game one in Minnesota, with Minnesota having a lot of production back, should put this matchup in Minnesota's favor. Like I said, it's favored 2.5 points in the Vegas lines, but I think Minnesota should have a decent advantage in this one. And the changing that many faces on the offensive line is going to be tough. Like I said, you never really get full speed until you get into the live game action. So you're talking about that that with providing a ground for Minnesota's defense that wants to create chaos, play fast, and create violent action on defense with Coach Corey Heatherman, that could give this offensive line piecemealed up together some issues moving forward. So I think that is going to be a big factor in this game. Now, Minnesota's run defense became worse and worse throughout the last season. Travion Henderson absolutely ate us up towards the end of the year. Braylon Allen absolutely ate us up toward the end of the year. And a lot of that was stemming from missed tackles. A lot of that was stemming from linebacker depth due to the injury issues. But overall, they're going to be tested because you're playing one of the best 3 running backs in the country last season. So UNC is definitely going to test and see if they have fixed that issue or if it is something they can take advantage of in 2024 to kick off the year. So that those 2 factors, I think, are the main make or break matchup issues for this game 1 versus North Carolina. Now, like I said, North Carolina's matchup last year was a lot closer than what the box score actually shows because UNC pulled away late to really take it over. Now, Minnesota missed on some major explosive plays that were open. A Daniel Jackson shot, a Lemeki Brockington shot, and then there was a terrible Cole Kramer interception on the one play he had to come in on. So overall, Minnesota had a lot of issues in its own right, but UNC earned their victory. So overall, Drake May had the biggest game of his year last year versus Minnesota, and it was the perfect storm that helped push UNC well ahead of Minnesota when it was all said and done. So it was UNC earned victory, but I don't think it will be the same this year. Now, I'm not saying North Carolina can't win, but I'm saying the Gophers should have an advantage with a lot of new faces on that offensive line. We'll see what it comes down to. I think it'll be a close one. It's going to be one of the better games of week 1, and we will have to tune in and find out before we know it. That's going to do it for us here at Locked On Golden Gophers. I appreciate you listening. As always, be sure to hit subscribe, leave a comment, leave a like. Let me know your thoughts. If North Carolina fans found their way to this video, I mean, I hope I gave some good updates here, but overall, I'm looking forward to the season starting, and I'll see you next time. Roll the boat, Sky Go Gophers, and as always, don't forget to hit subscribe.